He was standing on the porch of his own home when a stranger in a work uniform fired up a pressure washer and started blasting the paint off his walls. No warning, no warrant, just an order from the HOA. The water sprayed so hard it hit him in the face as his pristine white walls turned into a filthy mess, and he became a witness to his own humiliation. The police just shrugged. "This is a civil matter, sir." But no one knew who he really was, and absolutely no one saw what he was about to do next. But let's start from the very beginning. My name is Nathan Wells. I'm 42, and I've spent my entire adult life working as a designer. Brands, identity systems, architectural concepts. I was always the guy people called when they wanted things to look tasteful. So when I finally bought my dream home, a vintage Victorian mansion with columns, trim, and a wide front porch, I already knew exactly what it should become. Respectful of the past, but fresh. Elegant. White. And I don't mean some wild modernist overhaul or blinding neon finish. No. This was a classic matte white, the kind that highlights the structure's lines beautifully. The kind you see in architecture magazines. The kind the original architect might have imagined 100 years ago. I hired a team, bought high-end materials, drew up the entire project myself with detailed visualizations. And when work began, it felt like everything was going perfectly. Even neighbors passing by nodded in approval. One even said, "The neighborhood's starting to shine." Then, 4 days into the paint job, a letter landed in my mailbox. Official, HOA Pineview Hills letterhead, emblazoned with a crest which, ironically, I designed myself. But more on that later. I opened the envelope, expecting nothing out of the ordinary, and froze. 3 paragraphs of legal nightmare. The chosen paint color does not comply with the approved architectural unity standards of the neighborhood. All work must cease immediately. A $2,000 fine will be imposed for any further violations. Continued non-compliance may result in legal action. I was still on the porch, paintbrush in hand. The spring breeze buzzed in my ears, the scent of fresh paint tickled my nose, and that sheet of paper trembled in my other hand. All because of the color white. My first reaction? Confusion. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone got the address wrong. Or it was just an automatic letter that could be cleared up with a quick conversation. I replied politely, explained everything, attached photos of similar houses in the neighborhood, even quoted architectural standards for Victorian homes. I offered to meet in person so they could see for themselves. The response came 2 days later. Short, cold. The board's decision is final. Any attempt to alter the facade will be considered a willful violation. I read it over and over, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe it. This wasn't bureaucracy anymore. This was a show of force. The message was clear. You're nobody here. Doesn't matter that I'm a designer. Doesn't matter I spent tens of thousands of dollars. Doesn't matter that I improved the property. They are the rules. I'm the signature at the bottom of the page. And right then, standing in front of my half-painted home, I realized. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strike. The first one. And they weren't planning to back off. The week after the HOA letter, the neighborhood changed, but not in the way I'd hoped. Neighbors who used to nod and wave started throwing glances, whispering as they walked by. Some stopped at the edge of my lawn, checking in like they were inspectors. Melinda and Joe, my neighbors across the street, who just a month ago had asked me for landscaping tips. Now they were looking the other way when I passed. But the real star of the show was Linda Hargrove, HOA president, 60-ish, posture like a ruler, helmet, perfect hair. The kind of person who probably wakes up thinking, whose aesthetic is violating Pineview Hills today? She approached me 3 days after I got the letter. I was standing on the ladder, measuring one of the columns, when I heard the click of heels and that unmistakable tone, friendly like a plastic knife. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wells," she said with tight-lipped politeness. "We'd really hate for your home to become a source of visual aggression in our community. White, you know, tends to trigger anxiety in some residents." I turned around. She looked at my house like it had just confessed to war crimes. "It's a little too loud against the natural sand tones of Pineview," she added, squinting like the facade was a fireworks display. I nodded. Because honestly, I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, something like, "Since when is too loud grounds for a fine? Is this a desert museum or a neighborhood?" might slip out, but I said nothing, because I was still hoping it was just an overreaction, a misunderstanding driven by too much zeal. I was wrong. A few days later, an inspector showed up. Tablet, camera, measuring tape, and a look like he was collecting evidence for a felony case. He snapped pictures of every corner, marked coordinates, ran his hand along the walls like he was reading Braille, muttering into his report. "White's too cool. Blue undertones. No. At an angle, it's almost gray. That violates Section 7.3 of the Neutral Color Code, enacted in 2009. They even scheduled a special meeting, a disciplinary hearing to discuss, and I quote, "the precise shade of white used." Like I'd deployed a chemical weapon instead of a can of Snowbound by Sherwin-Williams. And then came the day I still refer to in my head as the slap in the face. I was in the backyard when I heard a low humming noise, like a hose. I walked around the house and saw a contractor I didn't hire, standing at the front wall with a pressure washer and using it. "Who are you?" I shouted. "Sent by the HOA," he replied, returning facade to approved appearance. No permission, no warning, no warrant. I felt something snap inside me. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The officer and I stood there while this poor guy kept spraying like it was just another Tuesday. And what did the cop say? "This is a civil matter, sir. The HOA is a regulatory body. If you'd like, you can file a claim." So they trespassed on my property, defaced my home, violated my rights, and my option was to fill out paperwork and wait for court. Great. I watched the water run down my wall, washing away the white, the freedom, and I understood this wasn't about paint or rules. It was about power, control, humiliation. And I realized something else. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I tried to be polite. I wrote letters. I offered compromises. I kept quiet even when someone was blasting my wall with a pressure washer. But everything has its limit. If the HOA thought they could stomp all over people without knowing whose ground they were standing on, well, let's just say it was time they found out where they really messed up. Because I'm not just a designer. I'm the person who created the face of Pineview Hills HOA. The logo on every letter, every web page, every flag outside their meeting hall, even the mugs they hand out at their quarterly community events. 5 years ago, back when I was still working with a branding agency, we were hired to develop the visual identity for a new upscale development. My concept was immediately approved. An oak leaf stylized as a map of the neighborhood, framed by sun rays. Elegant, symbolic, memorable. And yes, the copyright? Still mine. The agency had a standard contract, exclusive usage rights only with a licensing agreement. The HOA never signed anything. They just took the logo and used it for years. And while I kept quiet, I didn't care. But now I care. I dug out the original contract, double-checked the registration numbers, drafted a legal claim, and sent a letter to their attorney demanding immediate cease and desist, removal of the logo from all platforms, and a payment of $75,000 for unauthorized use. The reaction was instant. The HOA website went dark within 2 hours. Instead of a polished homepage, a white screen with the words, "Under construction." Next came an emergency board meeting. On the agenda, legal threat regarding copyright infringement. They couldn't even send out an official notice to residents. They had nothing to print it on. Without the logo, they had no authority. Without authority, they had no power. Then came the letters, printed like Craigslist ads. No headers, no president's signature. Just anonymous notices, like something out of a rogue zine. It was laughable. And through all that chaos, my house stood there, gleaming in the sunlight, in perfect white. But I wasn't done. I wrote an open letter to every resident of Pineview Hills, attached the documents, laid everything out, not just about the logo, about the hypocrisy, about how rules were enforced selectively, how someone could be harassed over the wrong shade of white, while the HOA itself broke federal law. How this wasn't about color, it was about control, about putting people in their place. The response came fast. Supportive messages poured in. Someone forwarded my letter to nearby neighborhoods. A few families filed a formal complaint with the county's Department of Real Estate and Housing. Old cases surfaced, examples of the HOA overstepping their bounds. One neighbor said they were denied solar panels, even with a green energy grant. Another was fined because a bench in their yard wasn't centered properly. People were waking up, and the biggest shift? Linda Hargrove vanished, just stopped showing up to meetings. Her name disappeared from official notices. Rumors said she took a medical leave, more like a fear leave. Either way, for the first time in years, Pineview Hills could breathe, and my white house stood at the center of that fresh air. 2 months later, I stood at the edge of my driveway, coffee in hand, under the soft spring sun, looking at my house. It gleamed. The matte white facade caught the morning light like it was smiling back at me. To the left of the front door, a neat plaque read, "Proud to be independent from HOA intimidation." And it wasn't just a sign. It was a statement. The HOA no longer had the unchecked power it once wielded. After the wave of complaints, the internal audit, and, according to rumor, a visit from the county inspector, they were forced into an emergency election. Over half the board stepped down. Linda Hargrove resigned, citing personal reasons everyone understood without explanation. One by one, their ridiculous regulations began to vanish. The clause requiring facade color approvals was gone, along with a string of other rules that had no legal standing but had long been used as weapons of control. And the irony? They came back to me. The new board, no smug smiles, just cautious respect, reached out with an offer to redesign their entire visual identity. The logo, the brand book, the presentations, the website, everything. And not as a contractor, as an independent professional. On my terms. Full rights. Prepaid. I read the email and laughed. Not out of spite. Just at how perfectly full circle it all came. I said yes, not for the money. And not because I owed them anything, but because sometimes the best way to destroy an old system is to give it a new face, a clean slate, a better meaning. Now every time I walk past that white facade, I don't just feel pride. I feel something deeper. This isn't just paint. It's freedom. It's a principle worth fighting for. It's justice, not granted, but earned through persistence, law, and grit. My house isn't just a house. It's a monument to the fact that even in the most rigid systems of control, there's still room for individuality, for resistance, and for victory. And yes, it's staying white, forever.